Will we ever find an apologist with a brain? I wouldn't be holding my breath. Certainly, we're not going to find it this time out as we wind up with Alisa Childers, and she clearly hasn't thought about any of her beliefs rationally at all. That's not exactly a surprise, though, is it? Because the religious, they just don't care. So let's watch the fail once again as I take apart her last claim, because it's honestly not difficult at all. Welcome to the last part of Alisa Childers' video, I promise, where she goes entirely off the rails once again. She, like virtually all apologists, doesn't understand the difference between fact and faith. They live so completely within a theological bubble that they just can't see the real world outside of it anymore, and that's kind of the problem. That's why this is all so painfully simple to take apart, because they're terrified to do anything but blindly believe. They couldn't care less about the facts. They can't be bothered to check their own work. So let's wrap this one up in a bow, because this is painfully, absurdly, verifiably dumb. But what else is new, right?
This brings us to question number 5. Is there any evidence outside the Bible that Jesus actually existed?
That's easy. No, there is not. Now, I'm sure she's going to trot out the same old tired, empty claims that the religious always do, and we'll just debunk those once again, because these people aren't interested in actual truth. They don't care about verifiable truth. They are only after having their preconceived notions confirmed, even if that confirmation is complete nonsense. So be ready, because we're going to go through all of this again. Before we get there, though, what do you think of her 5 things Christians should know? I mean, her explanations are crap. We expected that going in. But what of the questions themselves? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because I'm really curious. Really, what more can they do since Christianity is wholly intellectually bankrupt? But then again, let's get back to Alisa to see her go through the motions once again.
So this claim tends to make the rounds on social media from time to time, but the answer is really quite simple.
No, as I said. Yes, it is quite easy and simple to back up. You've got nothing. This is why apologists really are just apologizing for the failure of their own religion and trying desperately to throw anything they can find at the wall, anything at all, that sounds remotely good enough to the ardent believers that they'll just dump the contents of their wallets into the collection plate and go home satisfied. That's what this is all about, after all. That's why I am really not much of a fan of secular scholars who play this sure, why the hell not game on the question of Jesus. I guess it's easier on them, both because they don't have to do any of the hard work to evaluate the claims, and they get the religious to talk to them, and therefore they get to make money, and that makes it possible to make a living at this. But it isn't all that intellectually honest, at least in my opinion, and it's the honesty and the truth that really ought to matter. It's really a shame that for so many people, it simply doesn't.
There are 10 non-Christian sources that mention Jesus as an actual person within 150 years of his life.
Which means nothing at all, because none of those sources lived when Jesus did. None were direct eyewitnesses to anything at all, and all of them were just repeating stories. Just stories told to them by the believers who just wanted it to be true. But that doesn't make any of it true, does it? It's like citing news stories about Elvis sightings. Well, this guy said he saw Elvis after he died. Okay, so what? Did you do anything more than just write down what this lunatic told you? Did you go out and try to verify the stories objectively? Well, of course you didn't. I'm sure I can come up with a whole lot more than 10 news sources where that happened, but that doesn't mean that it's rational to believe that Elvis didn't die. This is why none of this is at all impressive. But sure, let's go look at your 10, and I'll spell out why each and every single one of them fails in the examination. So back to you, Alisa. Let's see what you got.
He's mentioned by Josephus.
No, he isn't. That's an established early Christian forgery, and virtually all modern scholars acknowledge that. Now, you'd think that the religious would give up on this one by now, right? But they couldn't care less about the truth. They're saying it because it sounds good to the believers. It's why you see so many Christians out there claiming Ron Wyatt found Noah's Ark and crap like that, because they don't give a damn if it's actually true. It's just confirmation bias. It's a whole lot easier to just believe than it is to go out and try to verify any of this objectively. So that's what they do. They just believe. I might be a bit early on this. I have no idea if she has more to say on Josephus, but he wasn't even born until 37 CE, which is far too late to have ever seen an actual living Jesus. In fact, by the time Josephus was writing his Jewish Antiquities, Josephus was in his late 50s, and most of the possible eyewitnesses, they would have been dead and gone anyhow. So no, this is a completely worthless claim, not like the religious care.
Tacitus.
Good, I didn't jump the gun. She's just going to throw out names, and I'm going to explain why none of these names actually matter. Like Josephus, Tacitus was born far too late to have ever seen a real Jesus. He wasn't born until between 55-56 CE, we don't know exactly, and he gets a lot of details wrong, meaning he didn't go and check it out for himself. He just took the word of the people he was talking to. For instance, he called Pontius Pilate a procurator, which his proper title was prefect. Procurator was only really in usage in the second half of the first century, far too late for it to have been accurate when Jesus was supposedly around. Thus, it might have been accurate in Tacitus's day, but it certainly wasn't when the event supposedly took place. So this is another one of these complete and total bullshit claims. No surprise there.
Pliny the Younger.
Born in 61 CE, so we have the exact same problem here. His account happened in 112 CE when he wrote to Emperor Trajan asking how he should deal with people who were accused of being Christian and describing some of their practices and rituals. In fact, the actual account went like this. They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses in hymn to Christ as to a god, and bound themselves by solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake in food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. But he was just describing things that he got from Christians, not any claim of the actual person of Jesus, and certainly zero evidence was offered up for anything. So this is just a whole bunch more bullshit. What the hell else is new?
Plegan.
I'm assuming that she means this guy. So I'm just going to go with that. Like the rest, Phlegon wasn't an eyewitness. He was born sometime in the early 2nd century, although we don't know exactly when, because I don't think any of his actual books survive to this day. Certainly not the one claimed to have mentioned Jesus. Origen wrote in Against Celsus that Phlegon mentioned Jesus. Now, Phlegon, in the 13th or 14th book of his Chronicles, not only ascribed to Jesus a knowledge of future events, although falling into confusion about some things which referred to Peter as if they referred to Jesus, but also testified that the result corresponded to his predictions. Now, that doesn't mean that he ever did, especially since Origen can't even identify where it might have actually happened. That is, at best, second or third-hand information that we can't say was ever real. Supposedly, it reported on the eclipse that supposedly happened at the death of Jesus, but we've already debunked that one entirely in other videos. Phlegon, if we're to take this account seriously, he wasn't even there. He was just saying there was an eclipse and an earthquake in Bithynia and Nicaea, so nothing of any substance there whatsoever.
Thales.
Thales, again, far too late to have ever been an eyewitness to anything, and his works do not survive, except in tiny fragments. But Julius Africanus claims that in the third book in his History of the Mediterranean World, recorded the darkness that was claimed to have coincided with the death of Jesus. Claimed, not demonstrated. Because this is another very common thing that we see among the religious. Well, there's something I can twist to sound close enough to justification, so it's just gotta be true. But that doesn't mean anything. There being an eclipse doesn't mean Jesus died. This is why we need direct evidence, direct, demonstrable evidence, and there simply isn't any. This is all just, well, it sounds good to me, and that's worthless. For people who are desperate to believe, taking the supposed words of others and using it for their own means, that is simply not impressive. We need direct, demonstrable, verifiable evidence, and there simply is none. So this is all just a giant waste of time.
Suetonius.
Again, born in 69 CE, way too late to have seen anything for himself. Suetonius made references to early Christians and their claims about their leader in Lives of the 12 Caesars, written in 121 CE. In fact, it really only addresses things that Nero did to Christians. And nobody is doubting that Christians existed. This proves absolutely nothing in regard to an actual Jesus. Nowhere in that section does it refer to Jesus at all. There might be a reference in that section talking about Claudius, but that's highly debatable if you want to look at it. According to the text, it says, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. The problem here is that Claudius was Roman emperor from 41 to 54 CE, far too late for the instigator to be Jesus. And as far as we know, Jesus never went to Rome. So that is, like all the rest, completely worthless.
Lucian.
Lucian wrote between 165 and 176 CE, so there's no eyewitness accounts there either. He wrote a satire of Christians in his Passing of Peregrinus, the story of a philosopher sage who, at one point, becomes a leader of the Christians in order to take advantage of their gullibility. Of course, this only confirms the existence of Christians, not of Jesus. Nobody is doubting Christians. We are looking for confirmation of the actual facts regarding a very specific human being claimed in the Bible. And that does not appear here.
Celsus.
We already kind of touched on Celsus a little bit, but again, far too late to have been an eyewitness for anything at all. He wrote in the latter end of the 2nd century. Celsus was a pagan philosopher who often made fun of Christians. Not Jesus, Christians. The works no longer exist, and we only know of them because Origen wrote a huge refutation in Contra Celsum, but nowhere is this any evidence for an actual historical Jesus either. Seriously, why can't they figure this stuff out?
Marabar Serapion.
Not an eyewitness. I mean, we don't even really know when he lived, sometime between 73 CE and the 3rd century, which tells you just how little we actually know. He wrote a letter to his son in which he talks about the unjust treatment of 3 wise men, the murder of Socrates, the burning of Pythagoras, and the execution of the so-called wise king of the Jews. Jesus is not mentioned by name, and Marabar Serapion could not have witnessed anything. This is just retelling stories told by the Christians, and this is not evidence for anything. This is just storytelling. Nobody should be surprised.
And the Jewish Talmud.
Sorry, that doesn't help you either. There are a couple of possible references to Jesus, but the terminology is questionable at best, and scholars are still debating whether any of it refers to Jesus at all, or if it is just other people coming from the Tanaitic period from 70 to 200 CE. Even if it did refer to Jesus, it doesn't matter because they're just repeating stories. There is no actual historical fact here. Telling stories doesn't make it true. And this is the problem that we see throughout. There are no demonstrable, verifiable historical accounts of Jesus from people who are actually there to see it for themselves. We already understand that there was a giant game of telephone going on, but that doesn't make any of it true.
Now, this does not include the abundance of Christian historical witnesses who wrote about him, including the eyewitnesses.
Except you don't have any eyewitnesses. The Gospels were written anonymously, and there's no reason whatsoever to think that the anonymous authors ever saw anything at all. You don't copy other people if you were actually there, and the vast majority of things in the Gospels were copied from pre-existing Gospels. Mark came first, somewhere around 70 CE. Matthew came next, and remember, these are just the names that were attached to the stories, not the people who actually wrote them. But Matthew copied about 90-ish% of the verses in Mark, sometimes verbatim. Direct copies, word for word. Luke copied from both Mark and Matthew. If you want some actual numbers, Matthew copied 606 of the 661 verses of Mark, and Luke copied 380 of Mark's 661 verses, with additional bits coming from Matthew. This is what leads to the synoptic problem, that these supposed eyewitness accounts are not eyewitness accounts at all. They bear absolutely none of the hallmarks of eyewitness testimony. If you were actually there, you don't need to copy word for word from somebody else. John just went esoteric and is largely unique material, but that's because the author, or more likely the authors, whoever they happen to be, they had an entirely different take on the whole Jesus character. None of this is demonstrably eyewitness testimony, and every shred of evidence that we have, it says it's just not.
If you want to learn more about this question, I'm going to link below an interview with Dr. Gary Habermas called Undeniable Historical Evidence for the Existence of Jesus.
Oh yes, Gary Habermas's minimal facts nonsense. You know, the stuff that started out with 12 facts and is now down to 6, and will certainly go below that soon. Because there is no evidence for any of it. It's all supposition based on faith on the religious side, and, at least in my opinion, intellectual laziness and a desire to keep working on the secular side. And none of that is impressive at all. Of course, you'll get people saying, well, that's just how historians work. Yes, it is, which only proves just how irrational a lot of historians are. And I've run that past a couple of professional historians that I know, and they actually agree. Historians are just as influenced by a desire to keep working, and the information they have is all the information they have, so they're going to say, well, it's good enough for us. Yeah, there's a fair bit of faith and fifis involved there as well. It's just not impressing anybody who actually cares about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but.
I'm also going to link to an interview on Mike Winger's YouTube page where he interviews historian Mike Licona, and that's called Real Historian Responds to Jesus Was a Myth Claims.
And we've taken out Mike Licona too. You know, the guy who, like Gary Habermas, has signed a binding statement of faith which requires him to agree publicly with everything the Bible says, or he loses his job. And in fact, Mike already faced that once, where he got fired because he dared to question something in the Bible, so he's certainly not going to do that again. So we've got Mike Winger, who's an asshole, interviewing Mike Lacona, who's an asshole, and there's Gary Habermas, who's an asshole. We're not getting any actual facts here, are we? We're only getting faith and fee-fees. We're getting interpretations borne out by their desperate desire to believe. It's all spin, no substance. What the hell else is new, right?
Now, if you want a resource that talks about all of these questions, I want to recommend a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. This will help you build the classical case for the truthfulness of Christianity, starting with the question, does truth exist? Moving through, does God exist? Who is God? How did he reveal himself in the world? Is the Bible the Word of God? And finally, the resurrection of Jesus.
And that book is a complete joke. Now, we've done tons of Frank Turek around here, and we've proven him to be a complete con man. I don't think we've really done a lot of Norm Geisler, at least not directly, although he has come up from time to time. And I did go looking for anything of his to address, but since Geisler died in 2019, and his official channel on YouTube, Norm Geisler International Ministries, mostly posts his sermons, and those are just way too long to go after. I'm having some problems. If you have any ideas, let me know. Now, there are shorter videos by his son, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So, as I said, if anyone can find a reasonable length video of Norm Geisler, say around 10 minutes or so, I don't know, a little more, a little less, whatever, with him making some worthwhile points and not just mindlessly preaching, I'd really love to see it, because he's one hole in my debunking, and I'd really rather not spend a dozen videos taking him down. There was one video I saw called 12 Points That Show Christianity is True. It's about 40 minutes long, and even though it's kind of sitting in my queue, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do that. Maybe a point-by-point refutation? I don't know. Maybe there's an article that he wrote out there somewhere. I really haven't looked yet, so if you have any better ideas, please let me know down in the comments, because he's somebody that I really, really want to go after if I can.
So I hope this video has helped equip you and give you a bit of a bird's eye view into what it might look like for you to begin to answer these basic apologetics questions as you become prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. And remember to do it with gentleness and respect.
No, it just reinforced just how utterly pointless the religious actually are and how little they actually know, because they're not interested at all in the truth. They only want confirmation that all the crap that they already believe is true, even if it's not. Because it's not at all hard to blow gaping holes in all of their claims. That's just a little bit of knowledge and a couple of minutes on Google, and everything they say falls apart. This is why they don't want to read outside of their religion, because anything that falls outside of their religion isn't desperately trying to keep them happy. This is why Christianity is a con, and that goes for just about all other religions as well. They are all doing this. They really want to believe, so they read things that pander to that desire, and then they just say, "See, we were right all along." They can't just see how circular it all is, because they don't care. This is why they don't want you to leave the hallowed grounds of religion and do independent research on your own. The second that you do that, everything falls apart, because reality doesn't start with the preconceptions that they hold dear. That's what did it for me. The second that I went outside the Bible and started looking at actual scholarly research, not theological claims, not wishes and dreams, not, but I have faith, but actual research, actual evidence, the whole thing just imploded into a massive irrationality, because that's what it actually is. That's why I'm not a Christian anymore. And it can work that way for you too. Care if what you believe is actually true. Not comforting, true. Because the second you do that, the second that you understand that your comfort is irrelevant to the facts, that's when you're on the rational path toward a true understanding of actual reality. That's when you're going to give up the religious bullshit. And that is a very, very good thing indeed.